On April 26, 1986, a catastrophic event unfolded in the Soviet Union that would forever change the world. The explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant is not just a story of human error, but a tale of heroism, secrecy, and the far-reaching consequences of a disaster that still haunts us today. The Chernobyl nuclear power plant was conceived during a time of immense ambition within the Soviet Union. The 1970s marked an era of rapid industrial growth, and nuclear power was seen as the key to the future, an energy source that could fuel the Soviet Union's expansion and assert its dominance on the global stage. Located in northern Ukraine, the site for the Chernobyl plant was chosen for its proximity to abundant water resources and its relative distance from major population centers. Construction began in 1970 with the goal of creating a nuclear power plant that would be one of the most powerful in the world. The first reactor, Reactor 1, became operational in 1977, followed by Reactor 2 in 1978, and Reactor 3 in 1981. The design of the RBMK reactors was unique to the Soviet Union. Unlike Western designs, which typically included a strong containment structure to prevent the release of radiation in case of an accident, the RBMK reactors were built without such a safeguard. The reactors also had a positive void coefficient, which meant that as the water coolant boiled and turned to steam, the reactor's power output would increase, creating a dangerous feedback loop.
The RBMK reactors were poorly designed. They were built without the necessary safety systems. We didn't even have a proper containment structure to keep radiation inside in case of an accident.
The decision to use the RBMK design was driven by the desire for efficiency and cost savings, but it came with significant risks. Risks that were not fully understood or disclosed by the engineers and officials in charge. The reactors were seen as a triumph of Soviet engineering. But beneath the surface, there were serious concerns among some scientists and engineers about the safety of these plants. Despite these concerns, the Chernobyl plant continued to expand. Reactor 4, the site of the future disaster, was completed in 1983. It was the latest addition to what was planned to be a vast network of nuclear reactors across the Soviet Union. The construction of the Chernobyl plant took place during a period of intense political pressure within the Soviet Union. The government, led by Leonid Brezhnev and later by Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Chernenko, was eager to demonstrate the superiority of Soviet technology and industry. Nuclear power was a key component of this strategy, but it was also a system fraught with secrecy and bureaucracy. The Soviet Union was a society where dissent was not tolerated, and where the priorities of the state often overrode concerns for safety. This atmosphere contributed to the decisions that led to the construction and operation of the Chernobyl plant, and ultimately to the disaster itself. Engineers and workers were often under immense pressure to meet deadlines and quotas, sometimes at the expense of safety protocols. This culture of pressure and secrecy created an environment where warnings were ignored and risks were downplayed. The result was a disaster waiting to happen. A disaster that would have devastating consequences not only for the Soviet Union, but for the entire world. Just 3 kilometers from the Chernobyl plant, the town of Pripyat was established in 1970 to house the workers and their families. Pripyat was a model Soviet city with modern amenities, schools, hospitals, and cultural centers. It was a place where the future seemed bright and where the dream of Soviet prosperity was being realized. By the mid-1980s, Pripyat had a population of nearly 50,000 people. The town was young. Most of its residents were under 30, and it was a symbol of Soviet modernity. But behind the facade of progress, the residents of Pripyat were living in the shadow of a ticking time bomb.
Pripyat was a city of youth, energy, and optimism. People believed in the future, in the power of science and technology. They never imagined that their lives would be turned upside down in an instant.
April 25, 1986, began as a routine day at Reactor 4. A safety test was scheduled, a test that would simulate a power outage, but as the operators reduced the reactor's power, a series of errors and misjudgments led to an uncontrollable chain reaction. In the control room, the operators were unaware of the impending catastrophe. When they finally attempted an emergency shutdown, it triggered a massive power surge. Within seconds, the reactor exploded, releasing a deadly cloud of radioactive material into the atmosphere.
There was a dull thump, and the entire room shook. Lights flashed, and alarms started going off, but we still didn't know the full extent of the damage. Nobody could imagine that the reactor had exploded.
The explosion was so powerful that it blew the 1,000-ton reactor lid off, exposing the core and sending a plume of radioactive particles into the sky. The immediate aftermath was one of confusion and disbelief. The reactor had been designed to be invincible, and the idea that it could explode was unthinkable to those in the control room. The first responders to the scene were firefighters from Pripyat, who were called in to extinguish the fires that had broken out on the roof of the reactor building. They had no protective gear and were unaware of the deadly levels of radiation they were being exposed to.
Внимание, внимание! Говорит штаб гражданской обороны города. Граждане, радиационная опасность. Радиационная опасность.
The residents of Pripyat were evacuated 36 hours after the explosion, too late to avoid exposure to the radiation. The delayed response and lack of information led to widespread panic and confusion. The evacuation of Pripyat was a massive operation, involving thousands of buses and military vehicles. Residents were told to take only what they needed for a few days, as they would be returning soon. In reality, they would never return. The town of Pripyat remains abandoned to this day, a ghostly reminder of the disaster. In the days and weeks following the explosion, thousands of workers, known as Liquidators, were mobilized to contain the disaster. These men and women, firefighters, soldiers, engineers, were sent into the radioactive zone with minimal protection, tasked with extinguishing fires, clearing debris, and constructing the sarcophagus to contain the reactor. The Liquidators knew the risks, yet they pressed on, driven by a sense of duty. Many of them would later succumb to radiation sickness, but their bravery prevented an even greater catastrophe.
I remember it was like walking into a furnace. The heat from the reactor and the radiation was unbearable, but we had no choice. We had to prevent the fire from spreading.
The work of the Liquidators was grueling and dangerous. They were exposed to deadly levels of radiation as they cleared debris, buried contaminated soil, and constructed the concrete sarcophagus that would encase the reactor. The Soviet government awarded many of these workers medals and honors, but the true cost of their sacrifice would be felt in the years to come, as many of them developed serious health issues due to radiation exposure. The Chernobyl disaster sent shockwaves around the globe. It exposed the weaknesses of the Soviet system, leading to increased international scrutiny and changes in nuclear policy worldwide. The radiation from Chernobyl spread across Europe, contaminating vast areas and causing long-term health and environmental impacts. The disaster forced a rethinking of nuclear energy's role in the world. In the years following Chernobyl, many countries re-examined their nuclear programs, implementing stricter safety measures and, in some cases, abandoning nuclear power altogether.
Chernobyl was a warning. It showed the world the catastrophic consequences of human error and negligence in nuclear safety.
In the Soviet Union, the disaster also had profound political consequences. It exposed the deep flaws in the Soviet system, including the culture of secrecy and denial that had allowed such a catastrophe to occur. Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, later acknowledged that Chernobyl was a key factor in the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. Chernobyl has become a symbol of the dangers of nuclear power and the human cost of technological hubris. It serves as a stark warning of the potential consequences when safety is compromised. The disaster also had a lasting impact on the environment. Large areas of land were contaminated by radiation, and the exclusion zone remains uninhabitable to this day. Wildlife has returned to the area, but the long-term effects of radiation on the ecosystem are still not fully understood.
The lesson of Chernobyl is that no matter how advanced we believe we are, we must never forget the power of the forces we seek to control.
The Chernobyl disaster stands as one of the most significant events of the 20th century, a stark reminder of the potential consequences when human ambition outpaces our understanding of the technologies we wield. The tragedy of Chernobyl continues to resonate across the globe, serving as a powerful testament to the need for vigilance, transparency, and a deep respect for the forces we seek to harness. As we reflect on the events of April 26, 1986, we are reminded of the fragile balance between progress and peril. A balance that, once lost, can have devastating and enduring effects.